Cheers, everyone. Thank you for joining me. I am Dave Brown, and this is the New Populist. I have an article from the Washington Post that I want to go over today because sometimes these elites, these betters of ours, say things and sort of give the game away without that being their intention. And they think they're writing something that's going to further their case. And in reality, they actually expose themselves. So, a couple days ago, there was an article written by the Washington Post editorial board trying to push Germany to give these tanks to Ukraine. Now, what's funny is that we have this Nord Stream 2 pipeline blown up by somebody. And of course, we claim that Russia did it for some reason, despite the fact that that provided Russia with leverage. And if you think back to 2018, 2019, when Trump was in Europe and he was actually scolding the Germans for having this pipeline that would increase economic cooperation between Germany and Russia, while at the same time we had this posture of trying to contain Russia, and we had NATO to contain Russia and to keep Russia in their cage there, right? And so Germany has always been the country of all the European countries that seems to be a little more open to some sort of negotiation, some sort of way to move forward that's not as bellicose or hard as Poland or the United States or Britain. And so when this pipeline got blown up, my suspicion, and people who are thinking rationally said, well, if this pipeline exists, it's leverage, but if we blow it up, that removes leverage, and then Germany doesn't have the encouragement to look for a peaceful solution. So we, I think, took that pipeline out to limit Germany's options. Say, hey, Germany, it's gone now, so you might as well join our team and go after Russia. So I 100% believe that the United States and probably Britain were involved in that to blow it up to keep Germany in line. So it doesn't surprise me later now that the entire collective West is teaming up on Germany to chastise them and browbeat them for not wanting to send tanks to Ukraine. Again, Germany is thinking, oh, is this the right idea? And we're going, what else do we have to do to convince you to go along with us? And so with that in mind, this Washington Post article comes out attacking Germany. And from the beginning, the title of the article, Germany is refusing to send tanks to Ukraine. Biden cannot let this stand. Now thinking, what does that mean? He can't let this stand. Our ally, our friend. Is that how you talk to a friend? Or is that how you talk to somebody that you think you can bully and push around? And one of my biggest problems with U.S. foreign policy the last 50, 60 years is it's either you do what we say or you're one of the bad guys who has to be crushed. And we will turn on an ally in an instant if they push back against us and don't want to play our game. And so here we are saying, Germany, you don't want to give these tanks up? Well, that can't stand. As if Germany has no say in the matter. And when they say that this can't stand, what are they implying? What are they going to do to force Germany to send these tanks? Well, we don't know, because it seems now that Germany, at the very least, is telling Poland, go ahead, send these tanks so Ukraine will get some tanks. But I want to go through this article and point out some parts where I go, hey, what the heck? Either it's a stupid statement or, again, it gives the game away and lets out some secrets, that things or facts that we've been denying for a long time. Here it accidentally confirms some of these things that we've been saying and that the West has been saying is BS. That those of us who are realistic have been going, no, this is the way it's going. And of course, the neocons go, no, everything's great. We have this united front. Russia's losing, blah, blah, blah. So let me start with this first paragraph. And it says, Vladimir Putin launched his illegal invasion of Ukraine 11 months ago, not only believing he would quickly subjugate Ukraine, but also on the assumption that the Western alliance was too weak and divided to put up a united front to thwart him. Both expectations proved disastrously wrong until Friday, when Germany's refusal to approve the transfer of dozens of heavy battle tanks to Ukraine opened the first serious crack in what has been NATO's solid front. Now, if us in the West, we're supposed to believe that Putin is irrational, and that when he invaded Ukraine back in February, and they moved toward the capital, and then they pulled back, and then focused on the South. Now, the Western narrative is that this was a failure to take Kiev. Now, if you're actually looking at this rationally, going, they brought in a force of 180,000 people. They were never intending to try to take over the entire country. They were trying to force Ukraine into some sort of negotiation over the Donbass. So they brought the force in. They thought that maybe that would be enough to get some sort of dialogue. And what Russia actually miscalculated was we were 100% A, wanting them to attack Ukraine, but B, we were never going to negotiate. Think about it right now, 11 months in. Has there been one Western politician in power saying, let's have some dialogue? No. We never intended to negotiate. We had the Minsk Accords, where there was this agreement for a ceasefire. And we've had multiple European leaders say, nah, that was BS. We never had any intention of honoring it. We were just buying time to arm Ukraine to fight Russia. We had the former president of France said that. The former German Chancellor Merkel said that. We were full of crap. We just wanted to buy time to arm Ukraine. So Putin went in thinking, I'm going to force a negotiation. He was really wrong about that. And so their forces drew back and they focused on the south of Ukraine in the Donbass area, and that's where they started their major operation. So it wasn't that he was trying to subjugate Ukraine and take over. He was trying to force a negotiation, and he miscalculated big time what the neocons in Washington were brewing up for him. It was never about any sort of negotiation. They wanted this fight. And Putin realized that months and months later. I think now, with the mobilization of 300,000 men, he finally understands it's go time. There's no negotiation. They're going to have to win militarily if they want to accomplish their objective. So, no, the way they say here in the Washington Post article, not how it is. But then it goes on. That fissure needs to be quickly patched. Left unresolved, the Kremlin's dictator is certain to try to exploit it, not only on the battlefield, but also in the parallel conflict zone of European public opinion. In addition to Western sanctions against Russia, which will take an increasing toll on the Russian economy and undercut its resupply of high-tech weapons over time, military aid for Ukraine has been key to Ukraine's survival and ability to blunt Moscow's superior numbers of troops on the battlefield. Germany has given Ukraine more military aid than any country but the United States and Britain. Now, here's a big one right there. They say that Moscow has superior numbers of troops on the battlefield. So wait a second. Ukraine had a pretty sizable army, and then they went through a full mobilization. And Russia had an invasion force of 200,000. It wasn't until September that they had the 300,000 partial mobilization. Ukraine has always had the superior numbers on the battlefield. The problem is Russia had all of the artillery, all the shells, and they've been fighting this artillery war for the last 11 months, which is why they've slowly just chewed up the Ukrainian military. But Russia never had the superior numbers, which is why when you had the Kharkiv counteroffensive, and you had the withdrawal out of Kherson, The reason why Russia did that was because they had this long line of contact, almost 1,000 miles, and they were severely undermanned in multiple areas. And so they said, instead of trying to defend areas where we have no soldiers pretty much, let's withdraw on the other side of the river, consolidate, because they actually didn't have these superior numbers, superior firepower, but not superior numbers. So why is the Washington Post saying that Russia has superior numbers? They don't, until actually now, possibly because they brought in those new troops. But even then, Ukraine has, I think Colonel McGregor said 180,000 troops that are actually effective in combat, and of course, hundreds of thousands more that are newly trained and being trained. So I do find it funny now they're saying Russia has these superior numbers. Are they acknowledging Ukrainian losses on the battlefield? If Russia was the one losing all the soldiers, as we've been told, and Ukraine has been suffering less casualties, which is not true, by the way, Ukraine should have superior numbers. So in a way, they're saying Moscow has superior numbers to gain sympathy for Ukraine to send more weapons, but in actuality, they're also it betrays the real issue, which is that so many Ukrainian soldiers have been killed in action, probably 150,000 plus all the wounded, and Ukraine's effective fighting force is diminishing. So we're going to see this pivot in this next 2 or 3 months where Russia will go on an offensive and really start to chew away. And I think a lot of what we're seeing right now is panic on the side of NATO, because even though they might say one thing, some of these commanders and generals, behind the scenes, they know what the real situation is. And they know Russia has the soldiers in place now. They're trained. They got the superior firepower. And now they're starting to chew away. And that's why NATO is freaking out and everybody's freaking out. And Germany apparently is the scapegoat here. They're going to try blaming Germany if all fails, right? The article continues. The fact of Germany's multi-billion-dollar commitment is testament to the remarkable recalibration in Berlin's thinking that occurred immediately after Russia's invasion. Having pursued 1 decades-long strategy toward Moscow, promoting economic partnerships and codependence based on the premise that such a policy would render a European war unthinkable, Chancellor Olaf Scholz executed an abrupt about-face days after Russian troops and armor flooded into Ukraine. He announced a major long-term increase in German military spending and made clear Berlin would stand with its NATO allies against an unprovoked war of aggression. So again, it reiterates what I was saying earlier. Germany had a policy of economic partnership with Moscow. They were trying to say, okay, let's make money together and not have wars. The problem Germany has is that they didn't quite understand just how much the neocons in the UK and Washington, D.C. wanted to go after Russia. 6 years of Russian collusion, Russian hacking, Russia bought Trump, Russia, all that kind of stuff. So Germany's policy was counter to the rest of NATO, which is just attack Russia. Germany was trying to have a partnership, and which is why I think even now we're still irritated with Germany, because they're being a little shaky and not falling in line with what we're telling them to do. They're actually having some level of independence. And good gracious, so should any country actually do what's in its best interest and not just do what the United States has told them to do? Remember, too, without the Russian gas, it's Germany's economy that's taking the hit, not the United States. So Germany is making so many sacrifices, and what kind of appreciation do they get from us? We just beat them and just accuse them of this and that and say they're not doing enough, and how dare they not send tanks. Being a friend to the United States comes with a lot of strings, and other countries are watching going, is it really worth it to be a friend of the United States? They will turn on us if we don't do what they say. And then there's a part here that I thought was particularly funny, talking about Olaf Scholz and why he might be a little bit, wavering as far as sending tanks. And this says here, Mr. Schultz is sacrificing sound strategy on the altar of political calculation by wavering in the face of opposition from some political allies and a segment of the German electorate. It is a misjudgment that cannot stand. Now, when I read that, I just laughed to myself. So he's responding to the part of the, or segment of the German electorate, also known as the people, who in a democracy are supposed to, tell the government what they want. The government's supposed to work for the people, not the other way around. So they're attacking Olaf Scholz for considering the electorate, the voters, the German citizens. The Washington Post apparently has a problem with that. The paper that says democracy dies in darkness is attacking Olaf Scholz for considering the German electorate in his decision making. What does that tell you? How crazy is that? And then they say it's a misjudgment that cannot stand. He's listening to some of his voters. That's bad judgment, and it cannot stand. And again, if it cannot stand, what does that imply? What is the United States going to do about that? And of course, we have a lot of ways to mess with people and countries that don't do what we want. So that's the tenor of this article. It's browbeating Germany. It's going after Olaf Scholz for not falling in line with what neocon Washington, D.C. wants them to do. And any country, this is the message we're sending out. And this is something that I've talked about in the past, and one of my biggest problems with American foreign policy. The message we're sending to the entire world is either you do what we say or we'll crush you. And in the long term, I don't think that is a tenable strategy. People are going to get annoyed. They're going to break away. And right now, with Iran and Russia and China and India, they're forming this other economic bloc. And a lot of countries, small countries, like in Africa and Asia, they're looking around going, I could partner with China and they'll invest here and whatever. Or I can go with the United States, but if I don't do what they want, they could turn on me. The next thing you know, there's a NGO in the country accusing me of being a dictator, and all of a sudden I'm overthrown. So you can only rule the stick for so long before people push back. You got to offer the carrot. And so Russia, China, they're offering the carrot. And the United States, we're offering the stick. And long term, again, I think that's going to be counterproductive and turn more countries against us. So going forward, how is this war going to end? I've said it in the past. I think eventually Russia wins. I think right now we're seeing NATO freak out a bit. The neocons, Washington Post, they're freaking out a bit because they see what's coming. So they can send these tanks, but it's not going to change the balance of the war. What will change it is if there's some sort of direct involvement by NATO, which is my biggest concern, because if that happens, we're looking right down the barrel of World War III, in which case we all lose because we simply couldn't negotiate, try to talk. And in this idea that Putin and Russia, they're so evil we can't talk to them. Again, we're going to go back over the last 40 years and talk about who's invaded what countries and who's destabilized what regimes. I think the United States wins that battle hands down. So for us to talk about acts of aggression toward other countries, it just kind of makes you scratch your head and go, really? We're going to be one saying that? Acts of aggression toward other countries? That's all we've done the last 30, 40 years. Whereas Russia, again, not approving of what he did in Ukraine, we were provoking that. We were arming them. They were shelling the Donbass because of those two Russian provinces that didn't want to go along with the government that was put installed after the overthrow, which we were involved in. And that war in the Donbass has been going on for 8 years, killing thousands of people, which is why Russia finally stepped in and said, "Okay, we see the game here. We're going to force things here," and that's what they did. And then we act shocked and stunned that this happened, as if it came out of nowhere because one day evil Vladimir Putin woke up and decided to go mad and just start invading countries, because that's how it happens, right? Now, that's a fantasy. Things happen for a reason. Even bad men do things for logical reasons. You can disagree with them, you can think they're evil, but they're not illogical and they're not irrational. There's a reasoning for it. And what Russia did in Ukraine, there's a reasoning for it. Again, not approval of it, but there's reasoning. And we did not help the situation. We fanned the flames. And now we're trying to hurt Russia as much as we can. If we can't get what we want, which is a overthrow of the government, a collapse of Russia, at the very least, we want to wound them so badly that they're irrelevant economically over the next several decades. That's what we're attempting. I think it's going to backfire. And the issue comes down to, if we get to a point where no one wants to back down, does this turn into a direct confrontation? That is my fear. Well, that is it for now. If you are new to the channel, please like and subscribe. I'll see you next time.